For some of you who are maybe graduating or are working in industry, then this is very much for you, because this is really about, Hoy gave a great presentation about the design and the essence, of something like a serious game. This is the everything else. So it's a bit of a business talk, a bit of a, what it's like to, operate in the real world, in the area of either deploying what we call extended reality solutions, AR, VR, and I'll talk about more about these in a moment, pure simulations, and even games that have a purpose other than entertainment. Clicker. There we go. Okay, so yes, as Justin said, I'm currently a researcher and lecturer at Griffith, and really for the last 9+ years since completing my PhD, I worked and helped build up a small business, first here in Brisbane, and then we took that business down to Melbourne, where that's what we did. We built serious games, simulations, and XR experiences for particular industries in the workforce. So some quick, I'll give a quick round summary of some of the works we did, just so you have an idea of the kinds of products we would have come to work on. We worked on pure simulations. Anyone from USC actually seen this? Yeah. Okay. So we helped build this, and it was really just creating a pure simulation of teaching engineering mathematics to students, and so. To be honest, it wasn't a lot of fun, but the goal was to really kind of practice and learn in a highly interactive environment that exactly simulated certain mathematical processes that you might go through. Same with learning how to use a Phoropter device. Anyone had their eyes tested and recognize this device? We actually don't use them as much anymore, but in developing countries where they can't afford a big expensive digital device, they are still very much using these very manual big clunky machines. Cost about $20,000 to purchase. So if you're in a developing nation and you still need to provide a eye clinic service at scale, it's actually really hard to train individuals to be optometrists, especially when you don't have the training equipment. So we worked with an organisation called the Brian Holden Vision Institute. They're a non-for-profit and they do a lot of research work. And we built a simulator that digitally simulated. Matt, where's Matt? Matt built this one, right? So we worked to kind of simulate just about every single knob and dial that occurs on that device, and then actually the NPCs would actually also respond. So a lot of the work we would do also relates quite closely to the approaches and the work that Hoy had been talking about this morning. In some cases, we share developers. So at one point, Hoy and I were also co-located in the same office down in Melbourne. So we always try and help each other, when we're out there as developers in this space, and we try and learn from each other's experience as well. And then we've got another more what we call on the more serious game end. So this is a serious game that was built once again by Matt that he worked on to really train Department of Agriculture workers how to risk manage invasive things coming into the country. We took a very much game-based approach with this one. We weren't simulating exactly what it's like to be a risk and compliance officer for the Department of Agriculture and clicking checklists. We actually looked at the core essence of the tasks that they would do, the type of challenges that they would face, but turn that into more of a strategy type game that they could come to play. And over the years, we built a lot of different things in this space, covering a lot of different sectors. But I'd like to just keep moving because, over the years of, building these simulation products that might have had a VR component, might have had an AR component to them, we started to face similar challenges and see the same problems both with our organisation and with others who are doing similar work in the space as well, and I'm going to touch on some of that in a moment. The typical, continuum slide of, how we might view XR, and it's the term I kind of threw up at the start. It's a bit of a newer term. We didn't have the need for XR 5 years ago. We didn't have the need for VR 10 years ago. We just had PC and mobile. But, throughout our journeys, we've had to adopt new types of technologies, and it's kind of Is it a VR application? Is it an iPad application? Sometimes we just try and find an umbrella term like XR, kind of encompasses all those different platforms and mediums that all might be designed with little different nuances to them. So this is the kind of work, in the area that we'd played in. The tools we'd come to use and the people we'd come to recruit to help us build this were Unity developers, and now more recently, I think Unreal developers are very much in high demand in this sector. But what I want to do is provide for you a semi-realistic user case that helps it, explain some of the challenges that is faced in the industry. And I'm not here to tell you today how we can necessarily exactly fix them. I've actually reached out to a number of different developers in this space. So in this instance, and I'm taking from an existing project we did, I've just changed all the names a little bit, and it was a successful project in many ways. But in this project, we were approached by an electrical distributor organization, a very large one in the country. We had to help them standardize their training and assessment and help them produce competency data in their workforce that allows them to kind of show that they're meeting the national guidelines in training for that workforce. And they had an issue with workers feeling a little bit not so confident to go out as a new trainee into the workforce. And the work they were doing was getting up on cherry pickers and operating on high voltage line work. So if you make a mistake, you die. That is the realistic case. And so they did put a lot of emphasis into the quality of their training, and confidence is key here. You don't want people fumbling around and making mistakes up there. You want to find a low risk environment for them to practice, make those mistakes, learn, and then go out up the cherry picker and operate as a professional. So in this project there's a lot of successes, and these are exemplar successes, but these are very common in this industry. We were able to deliver the project in 6 months. These projects range in the hundreds of thousands often, and in this fictitious example, we got it in under budget, so we didn't blow out the budget, so the client was happy. We met the design specifications. All the touch points within the organization we talked to were happy, with the delivery of the solution we gave to them. CEO was happy. We made the news, and in this case, we actually did. And we rolled it out in an initial 3-month pilot to about 300 staff. So this is very endemic of how a lot of these type of contractual situations go when you're providing this kind of service to customers, especially in the VR and AR space. And this is very much our business to their business relationship, which is also quite common. But there are many other relationships you might have. You might be, as a developer, providing a solution to the consumer and put it on Steam, for instance. So it goes out to potentially millions of people, but it's not very targeted. It's kind of for everyone. Whereas these kinds of solutions are often for a very particular customer. Anyway, a lot of success to be had. But in my fictional example, after that pilot, a very common problem occurred, and that was this solution sat on the shelf for eternity. And we always ask ourselves, why does this keep happening? And then all of a sudden we're working on another project, and we just don't have time to think or breathe often. And so I took the opportunity of this talk to really just do a little bit of a deeper dive into maybe why this keeps happening, because previously looked successful in some regards. We met the brief, we got paid, everyone seemed to be happy, but after we stopped delivering it, it just didn't go anywhere. So I wanted to understand a little bit why, and it's not just my opinion. What I did is I actually reached out to a whole range of different developers around the country that I'd come across over the years, called them up, asked them a bunch of questions, and I started to kind of create a bit of a thematic analysis around some of the reasons why they feel like success might start to occur if you're kind of getting into this space, and based on their experiences as well. So I'm going to share I guess a summary of some of the successes that, the tidbits that they've said, hey, this has worked really well for us, as well as they've, elaborated on maybe some barriers that they came across. So something I want to just cover off before I get into, some of those findings is this is a problem not just in, serious game simulations, XR experiences, You got to treat this problem as a technology adoption problem. And in the business world, this has actually been talked about to death. How do I get my new widget out into market? And hear about success stories in Silicon Valley of people making billions, creating a new widget. But there's an exponential amount of companies that have failed along the way, and we're always asking, well, why? And a good way, one of the lenses we can use is there's a concept called the diffusion of innovation theory, where we can start to identify that there are maybe what we call market segments or types of people that you will introduce your solution to, a game, a widget, a new toothbrush, and some are going to be the believers. It's a small percentage, but those people just get it. They're the ones that wait in the line to get the new iPhone every year. They're always into the latest technology. A lot of you in this room are probably in that category, just in the nature of working in the game space. We've got faithful followers. They kind of watch everyone else adopt technology first, and then if it looks good, they'll go buy it and use it. This area called the chasm, it's called crossing the chasm. This is often where people identify, this is where your product has failed. You managed to convince the first two crowds, but you couldn't convince the skeptical majority. The people that are kind of like, I'm going to wait till this has been rolled out for a year before I even touch it. Because I want to see that this works. I kind of like the way I do things currently, so I'm not really going to change things. And then it goes downhill from there. It is, we're talking about your parents, we're talking about everyone who hates technology, are often in that later crowd until the point where it's like, no matter what you try and do to convince someone, they're not going to touch your solution with a bar of soap. So, this is one lens we can use to try and understand when we're approaching trying to get this out, get our new solution out to customers, even internally within an organization. How do we address some of these markets or some of these areas? My analogy, everyone talks about crossing the chasm from the faithful followers to the skeptical majority. It's a very commonly talked about thing. Not a lot of people talk about there's actually gaps on gaps. And we're a lot of VR projects I see, AR projects, HoloLens projects. They get the believers on board through a pilot period. But after that pilot, you need to leap across to getting embedded into an organization and then go through the tiers of different people. And that's where things often fail very quickly. And so we see a lot of this. A common catchphrase that gets thrown around is, there is someone who is often the gatekeeper between allowing your technology to move from the believer group to the faithful followers. And it's on their shoulders that if your technology doesn't work or gets bad press at some stage, they're going to lose their job. So it's actually kind of easier if I just say no to your new VR technology because I heard one person say it made them feel sick. So it's really important that we try and identify some of these barriers that do occur in the design process so that we can actually achieve success throughout the entire continuum there. So, this is very early days research. This is really just an observation I've made. I've kind of stepped out of that world a little bit whilst I've been teaching. So I was able to, then have a bit of a breather and start talking to some people. And I'd like to continue to start talking to even more developers in this space as I guess the next couple of months go on. But from a select few developers, I came up with a few different categories of the types of things they were saying to me in those interviews, and kind of did a bit of a thematic analysis to cluster some of those comments to a few key outcomes or ideally pieces of advice that it's not just me saying it. This is actually a bit of a consensus from a lot of the people I've talked to. Okay, and I'm going to be using real photos from my backgrounds to try and elaborate on some of these stories, and Matt will have a smile at some of them. I don't think you're in any of them though. So. But first one, and this is probably the one that everyone mentioned, was when you have a technology or a solution, you're working with the customer. It's really important that you identify what we call the champion, the person who they're often the main touch point that you're working with, but it's more to just a contractual arrangement with them. They're the one that's going to be internally promoting your solution to the rest of the organization. So you really need to work very hard at making sure they're comfortable, equipping them with all the evidence and all the pieces of material they need to help promote your solution, because you can't just walk in and talk to every employee to use your great VR experience. You really need to actually work through someone, and that someone's called the champion. So this champion, he's called Andre. As a success, we found huge success with this individual. And it's not just any individual. It's about identifying someone who maybe is an early believer, someone who has a lot of enthusiasm for technology and is in a position that they can actually get around and network within the organization. And it's really important to also consider when you're designing your solutions for them, serious games or a VR solution, you're not just designing for the end user, you're kind of designing for the champion, you're designing for the person who's going to be rolling out your solution within an organization. A bit of an obvious one, if you've done a lot of design and product development, but the concept called product problem solution fit, clients told you a problem. Have you really understood the problem and then created a solution that actually meets and solves that problem? Often clients will give you a bit of a cursory summary of what they think the problem is. And if you take that, then you may be misguided in some way. So it is important that you do go back. You run co-design workshops. I would use a lot of task analysis, putting cameras on people's heads, watching what they do. And everyone who I've talked to has kind of said the same thing. It's really important you understand the problem and then just really be sure that your training solution or your AR solution is really addressing that problem. And then quality design and usability. So user testing is king or queen, but it's really important that you are putting out a high quality product, not a product that, oh yeah, we did the build last night, here you go client. That will just lead to failure. It will be buggy, it will be broken, but also it's not a habit you want to get into. So, everyone I've talked to, once again, they've always had that buffer amount in a project when they scope it out, that they need to have that usability and that quality testing performed, so that it's kind of almost delivered a couple of weeks before the due date. And so that's why we teach you these things in class all the time, okay? I've learnt the hard way from many years of experience here. An interesting one that's often not talked about. It's sometimes hard to do this, but you're working in a team. You're having to get them onboarded to empathize with the new training solution that you're working on, whether it's in healthcare, agriculture, or some other industry. If you keep them in the office and you stay in the office and let the business person go out and talk to the customer, that's how most people will come to operate. It's the cheapest way to operate. But there's a very common pattern that does emerge, especially in this industry, where people can get disengaged within the team and maybe the product they develop and work on just feels a bit lackluster, doesn't really feel like they've empathized enough with the end user. So it is actually important that you get your dev team out into the field, even just once. In the past, we've gone to the extent of going overseas to the area that this solution would be rolled out to in the future and getting everyone there. That can be quite expensive. So sometimes it's about picking and choosing. As developers, this is something, going into this industry perhaps, this is maybe something that you might need to ask or request for. It's like, I really need to feel and smell what it's like to be in a factory in a 40-degree day, because that's going to help me produce better art, and make that argument, because it actually is really important. And the advice that I've heard as well, it's been backed up there. So another common trope that occurs is, customer or client pays you for a service, deliver a VR product, for instance, and you say, here you go, you've paid me for this work, and then we're hands off. Thank goodness we don't have to touch this product again. And if you only care about the financial transaction, or maybe a feather in your cap that did this project, and that's fine. But if you just leave the product alone, I'd almost guarantee that it will have problems down the line that you might have to go back and fix. Whether it's your quality control measures miss something, whether it's iOS updates every 3 months, which it does, and that you have to do a new iPad release. The customer's always going to keep coming back. Oh, it's not working anymore. So the lesson learnt is think about this actually during the design process. Try and convince the customer the fact that we can't just hand you this product over. It's not a spanner that's cast molded and I can hand it to you and it's going to be indestructible. It is going to break. You're going to need help to fix this thing. Let's actually find a solution, a contractual solution that allows us to keep working on this thing, maintain it, because your end users are actually going to be really thankful for this as well, that we can slip in some new improvements perhaps. Also, we're having to kind of keep up with the latest technology often. We've got an Apple Vision Pro we're going to have to start supporting at some point soon in the future. that requires us to do this a lot, some sort of interaction to engage with it. That's fine. That works for some people, doesn't work for everyone. So we're often having to think ahead of the curve, even think ahead of the manufacturers have thought about, especially when it comes to accessibility. Because it is Microsoft, Apple, Sony, they all did a pretty good job of accessibility from a fundamental mechanism, but they're not the ones actually rolling this out to customers every day. Everyone's needs are going to be different. You're going to be the one who really knows maybe what the accessibility needs are for that workforce. So you'll have to really think about some of those things. Otherwise, and I've rolled out a lot of head-mounted displays, smart glasses, VR devices. They all have very common fatigue issues, eye strain issues that do occur for people who don't have barriers around eyesight. So you can imagine that these things get exacerbated for someone who might have a barrier to certain areas. Cybersecurity is another one. If you're going to work with government, they're always going to ask for an IT audit, so just plan ahead for it. Otherwise, you'll get to the pilot, they'll be like, great, can we get an audit? And then you'll be like, we don't have any money for that. So keeping rolling on. It is, the advice given to me and stuff that we've done, think about a financial model. There's many out there that could be achieved. You could do a fee for service arrangement that is, chunk based with the client. You could, build product IP yourself and then sell it back at a much lower rate at a subscription basis. That's quite common. And because if you don't do these things, then you are going to be delivering a product at the pilot stage, and then it's just going to sit there, and there'll be no money to fix it. So you really need to think about how can we actually provide a bit of a financial model to help support and sustain this thing. Grants are another way to get going, but grants don't stick around forever. So it is important that we work with the clients and the customers to think about, okay, how do we keep this going within your organization? Can you, as a client, on-sell this to other people in your industry? And that's a very workable model that I've seen work actually really well. Another key thing just on the financial stability front, a story that was told to me, Defence, they will often run face-to-face training that is $10,000 per person an hour because they're bringing in lots of heavy equipment to practice on. So you rack that up and you're running face-to-face training on site for tens, close to $100,000 or hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're running it over a couple of weeks. So when you have an existing situation where the client's paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for their training, face-to-face training, if you can find a way that is financially stable enough to come in and still meet many of the demands of that training, but at a much scalable and cost-affordable rate, then the person saying no originally to letting this progress all of a sudden just looks at the numbers. They're numbers people often. They're looking at KPIs, they're looking at numbers, and they're going, okay, well, my existing training cost me $800,000 to roll out. This new VR thing cost me $50,000 to roll out. I'm going to give this VR thing a go and actually support it a little bit more. So it's about looking for opportunities where there is that big trade-off. So just touching on, and I'll try and wrap up in a moment because everyone's hungry. We will often be confronted with clients saying, hey, here's a 100-page manual, can we turn it into VR? That's often where the conversation starts. Maybe some of you have had this conversation already and you might chuckle and laugh, but it happens all the time. So part of the journey you take with the customer is teaching them about what's good about game design, what's good about a good VR or AR experience, what's not a good VR AR experience. Death by PowerPoint in VR is not a good experience. Okay, so we don't want to replicate that. But if you're just saying yes, yes, yes to the client and the customer, you may actually end up, and lesson learned from our experience, we had to compromise once and kind of go, okay, we will do a bit of a slide presentation just to meet your learning objectives because we're out of money. The lesson learned was we should have caught that earlier. We should have tried to redesign that training to actually find a better way to present that slideshow presentation that we ended up getting stuck with. So, because if you end up with death by PowerPoint in VR, you've not really had a solution that meets the problem. Other barriers, thinking about the diffusion of innovation curve that I mentioned earlier, it is people within these organizations that are often the biggest challenge and barrier to work with. Not all the developers have to face this, but you will, be introduced to this occasionally. Your L&D champions, the people that you're originally working with, aren't the ones that actually sign off on the next phase of your project. It is the CEO, it is the C-level of people. It's the people that are numbers people. So it's about understanding what's the real value and return on investment that you can provide to your solution, because you need to get that prepared and ready as soon as you've delivered that pilot. Wham, here's the numbers, here's how it's actually really going to save your business money or stop people from dying. Understanding the KPIs for the business is actually pretty important there. And the stakeholders, all of them just need to be, they often have an aversion to change. They are of a generation that is not often ours. They often say things like, is this going to take my job? I like the old way of doing things. If I adopt this, what if I lose my job? All those kinds of just biases that come up, which are often unfounded, but we hear them all the time. So there is something there that we need to find ways to allay these. Another really important thing just to understand is, and everyone's been telling me the same thing, there is a cost to use your solution, even if you give it to someone for free. The cost is employee time. It's, they're getting paid to do a job. If you give them training and they're not doing their job, then that's costing the business money. The organisation and you rolling out this throughout their IT network has a charge to that. You're taking time away from other business they might be doing. So it's really important that you actually understand the type of costs involved. Even if you gave out your solution for free, it still costs an organisation time and money to use it. Therefore, the gain you give them really needs to be outstanding. It really needs to be significant because it has to outweigh any of the costs. And you can look to address some of the costs in many innovative ways, but really trying to find, sometimes it means saying no to projects. A project that's like, yeah, we can digitize your PowerPoint, but I just don't think that we're going to really give you the gain you need to outweigh the costs that it's still going to take from your organization. And that's a really hard thing to do. Often when we're first starting, we just want to say yes, yes, yes to all the projects that come in. But over time, you start to build a bit of you learn to say no, you learn to compromise with individuals. And I think, this is the last one. So, does anyone know about the Black Swan? Black Swan events? Okay, so Black Swans are jerks. They appear like the untitled goose. All bird creatures like that, I think, do these things. Black swans are an unpredictable event that is beyond what is normally expected of a situation and has potentially severe consequences. So GFC, global financial crisis, COVID, just big global crises that occur slam our industries. So in 2008, a lot of game development companies collapsed here in Brisbane, purely because there was financial issues with overseas money no longer being affordable to operate here in Australia. So that was kind of a black swan event that just crippled an entire industry. COVID, especially for the VR space, where a lot of the engagements were face-to-face, were presenting at conferences and training workshops, all of a sudden, I know a lot of companies that actually collapsed during the COVID period, and it was out of their control. They had no way to figure this out. And so I guess the thing to leave you with is, and even the person you've been working with for 3 years internally within an organization, you've got a great relationship. If you keep them happy, you're still going to have a contractual relationship with this organization. They have a life-changing moment, they want to leave the business, they're gone. There goes your opportunity. So, I've learnt this, all the people I've talked to have learnt this the hard way. And so as we go in, to these industries, these are just some of the things that we might want to try and tack on and consider, and try and get it early throughout the design process, rather than kind of thinking about all these things right at the end. That's it.
Thanks, Stuart. That was great to get some insight into some of the commercial applications that we're working with. Just a couple of quick questions before we send you off for a lunch break. Any questions for Josh? I'm going to give on, so watch your heads. That was straight. Distance could have been an issue.
So I've worked in operational improvement consulting,
Cool.
and you can run great improvements, and then in the period afterwards, your champion, they've earned a lot of political capital, they move on to better jobs, they leave that role, you lose your champion, you enter that chasm that you cannot pass because they've already moved on and no one picks up that project. I noticed you didn't mention that in your chat. Have you considered that before?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I was alluding to just right at the end there, that, you know, the person we've been working with for 3 years is kind of moved on, and there goes the opportunity. Is that?
It's
and
quite a common event.
Yeah, and it's not just games and VR. It's every industry. This is an industry problem, and I don't have the solution, you know, to that. But what I could say is just know that this can occur, and it's maybe not you as a developer, but you might want to encourage your CEO or your business development manager that, hey, what if Joe leaves the business? Have we got anyone else that we've been engaging with? And so do try and foster a couple of relationships as that backup, and just expect this person's going to be gone in, give them a lifetime of 2 years within an organisation, because it's probably going to happen.
A good way that some other companies I worked for got around it was having an on-site person.
Yeah.
So when you're running a project, if you always have someone on-site, and even for 6 months afterwards, other people in the business who have seen your implementation can come to your office and then find new solutions to implement, and that's a good way of generating additional projects in business.
Yeah, it's a good idea, and it is something I have definitely seen, especially in hardware solutions, big cave systems, VR maybe. Another thing I probably didn't elaborate on enough is treat your solution as it needs to onboard anyone in that situation really well, because you don't know potentially who that champion might be in the future. So your tutorial should do a really effective job at getting them on board, but your tutorial can't be long and complex either. So it's a really hard balancing act. A lot of you have tried to make tutorials even recently and probably struggled a little bit. How do I stop this thing being a 20-minute quick fest? Click this button and then click this button. So it's a really hard design to get right, but it is achievable as long as you're aware of it. But yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Ralph, thanks for the talk. It's always really great to get that, real world experience, and a lot of pain. It was, as in, it's like I can't watch The Office because it's just too close to places I've worked. I'm like going, oh God, yes, no. I certainly agree with the champion stuff. That's stuff that when I used to work in a research center and we used to roll stuff out as a key thing. One of our selection criteria for the champion was that what we were doing would help them in their career.
Yep.
Which inherently made them move out of where they were really useful to us. So looking for kind of champion sort of succession planning was, absolutely part of it. Well, the actual question though was, have you had any kind of deployments of projects where you kind of went, we deployed it, and after the pilot, it didn't go onto the shelf to gather dust? What was your biggest win?
I mean, the first project we did is still being used. The reason why it's still being used is in part how it's enforced. It became a contractual obligation to be trained using this tool. Zach's worked on a learner logbook driver app where there's a contractual obligation to get your license to log your work. So sometimes these things, you don't want to rely on them. The game should be, interesting and motivational pieces on their own, but sometimes some of the things need to be interoperable with contractual arrangement.
Legislated.
Yeah, legislation. Justin's worked on serious games where children need to learn math skills at a very particular age and time in their life. If you build the best product that does that, then all the children who are at that time in their life are going to ideally then use your product. And so finding good little niches within the market that really are right for the right person or the right type of people often ensures that longevity of a solution. Justin's still got serious games that have been used for how long?
Yeah, long time.
20 years?
I think.
Same one, right? Some of you have probably played
Galactic Retrieval Squad was 2002. And Chris worked on Maths Invaders and
Yeah.
Typing Tournament, and they've been around for a long time. They're curriculum driven, so they don't
Mm.
have to curriculum. So,
We don't have all the answers, but and some of it's luck, but luck ideally turns into experience, and you kind of know how to engineer that luck again. So this is hopefully a bit of an insight into how others have come to engineer some of that luck.
Last one, and then again, I'll just remind everyone, Josh will be here all day. He'll probably hide at some moments in time, but you'll be able to grab him, and feel free to ask questions of people who talk today.
So just wondering, how would you get your foot in the door for this side of the industry?
Yeah, good question.
Thanks, Scott.
I mean, there are companies that do this. Enabler. Max Art's another one I know off the top of my head in Brisbane. Sometimes it starts with working on a research or university project, but you've got to take in mind that how do I turn that university or research project beyond that pilot? So the foot in the door sometimes is working on some of those things, or if you're considering going and doing an independent studio yourself, graduating, this is a viable career option for you. It's not always just about games, and from what I've heard from someone who runs one of the large serious games groups in Australia, he's seen a lot of success on Steam, whereas someone's taken a game idea that it's actually pretty fun. The games that have a more serious angle to them, you kind of learn something from playing it and get a very emotional response from playing it. And it's sometimes hard to put those games in a bucket, and to be honest, who cares? But that's also a very viable way to consider, I want to have a lot of meaning and purpose, and for someone to walk away with a very memorable experience where they've changed their behavior around something. And if you can...
People like Josh is
Yeah.
trying to say, you've got a lot of transferable skills and knowledge as a game designer if you can use a real-time engine.
Yep.
A lot of opportunities, embrace them all, really.
Yeah. So look, if you're considering independent, thinking about and then engaging. Ideally, you want to engage with a problem and a customer. Thinking about the problem in your own head, in your own office, without engaging with the actual real problem, is going to lead to disaster, because you will make wrong assumptions. You really need to actually then work with someone in healthcare or whatever industry you might want to provide a solution to, and just have that relationship. It starts small often, so I might leave it there, but happy to keep chatting.
Awesome. Thanks again, Josh. So we'll go for a quick lunch break. We are going to try and start back again on time, so it'll be a bit shorter than we planned. So if you're looking for things to eat, there's straight across here, there's a Woolworths and there's some takeaway joints there. Also straight down through the parklands here. Grab something, feel free to bring it back.